Hello everyone, well exactly this is 2 o'clock and you're hooked on to your only truly show, and I am your host RJ Roy, and with me my friend Mr. Aditya. And as you know, every night in this show we share a true crime story from a diary, and the diary belongs to Mr. Aditya's grandfather. And Mr. Aditya's grandfather was a crime reporter of his time, and he maintained a diary entire his life to note down all those cases that happened on his period of time. So Mr. Roy wants to share with us those cases and pay tribute to his grandfather. So everyone, we are not going to waste any more time. Let's hear the story for tonight. In the year of 1972 to 13 August 2004, Bharat Kalicharan, also known as Akku Yadav, was an Indian gangster, robber, home invader, kidnapper, serial rapist, extortionist, and a serial killer of that time. He was terror of that time. Yadav grew up in the Kasturba Nagar slum, which is outside the Indian central city of Nagpur, Maharashtra. He lived and did business in the slum, which housed a number of criminals and 2 rival gangs. Yadav's earliest known crime was a gang rape in 1991. He was 18 years old of that time. Yadav and his gang committed crimes like rape, murder, home invasion, and extortion in Kasturba Nagar for 13 years until his death. Yadav tried to create a small business empire, like a syndicate of that time. He extorted money, harming and threatening those who resist him. During his life as a criminal, Yadav murdered at least 100 of individuals. He tortured and kidnapped people, invaded homes, and raped over 40 women and girls. He even bribed police, giving them money and buying them drinks to convince them to let them continue committing crimes. As a result, the police not only refused to stop Yadav for many years, but supported him as well. Yadav and his associates gang raped women and girls as young as age 10 as a warning to those who resist him. Akku Yadav had 2 brothers, Santosh and Yuvraj. He was a higher caste man who had turned an anticipants as a small-time thug into a role as a mobster and king of the slum. Yadav ruled a gang of criminals who controlled the Kasturba Nagar slum. They robbed, tortured, and killed people with impunity. Yadav committed crimes several years as he created a small business empire or a syndicate. Akku and his gang member often harassed and intimidated people to extort money. Extortion was his main source of income. Yadav characteristically threatened to rape anyone who resisted him. He would hurt people if they do not give him money or if they angered him in any way. Prativa Urkude and her husband Datta run a small grocery shop, and Yadav harassed them for years. He would pick up goods from the shop and refuse to pay, or would simply pay much less than was owed. Sometimes he would demand money and become violated if they were unable to pay. Yadav often worried he would be plotted against. As a result, he did not permit men or women to gather and talk. He made sure young boys did not play together, and if they did, Yadav would break up their games. Suspicious that people were asking questions about him, he would warn people against reporting his crimes to police, threatening them if they did so. Killing left inconvenient corpse that required him to bribe police to prevent them from stopping his crimes. Rape, however, was a very stigmatized, and as a result the victim could be reeled on to remain silent. Yadav raped people to silence them far more frequently than murdering them. The woman who killed Yadav claimed that he had been raping and abusing local women with impunity for over a decade. They complained that local police had refused to help his victims or purpose charges because Yadav was bribing them. Yadav accused raped so many people that according to the resident of a Kasturba Nagar slum, a rape victim lives in every other house. Yadav accused raped over 40 women, his youngest victim being a 10-year-old girl. One person described that we stayed mostly indoors when Akku was around. Women have said Yadav and his gang would invade homes many times of a day. He sometimes wanted a motorcycle or would grab a mobile phone for extort money. Yadav and his gang member would beat up anyone who resisted them. He murdered a woman named Asha Bai, a daughter of Anjana Bai Borkar, in front of her 16-year-old granddaughter. By the way, this granddaughter Borkar was one of the 5 women arrested for Yadav's lynching. Speaking of Yadav, a granddaughter said, "We were eating dinner when he came to the front door and pretending to be a friend of my brother. When my mother opened the door, he dragged her out and stabbed her into her chest. He then cut off her ears for her earrings and her fingers because he could not get her ring." Yadav had reported murdered at least 3 people and dumped their bodies on a local railway tracks at a time. One woman described how she and her husband were attacked by Yadav. He came to the near house at 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. Yadav knocked aggressively on their door saying he was a police officer and asked them to open it. Once Yadav entered, he stabbed the husband in the thigh with a knife and locked him into the bathroom, then dragged the wife by her hair away to the place where he raped her. Yadav allowed her to return after 3 or 4 hours later. In January 2004, Yadav was banned from entering Nagpur city. An elderly man named Harichand Khorse, who entered a small amount of money paying a musical instrument called a baja, was beaten violently by Yadav and his gang because he was unable to pay only $100 or 100 Indian rupees. According to the neighbor in the Kasturba Nagar, Yadav once raped a woman right after her wedding. He also stripped a man naked and burned him with a cigarette. then forced him to dance in front of his 16 years old daughter. Yadav took a woman named Asho Bhagat and tortured her in front of her daughter and several neighbors by cutting off her breasts. Yadav then sliced Bhagat into pieces on the street and killing her. A man named Avinash Tiwari, one of the neighbors, was horrified by this incident and he went back to the police for report this matter, but police refused to take. As a result, Yadav butchered him in front of neighbors. Yadav and his men gang raped a woman named Kalma 10 days after she gave birth to a baby. After what happened to her, Kalma committed suicide. She burned to death after dousing herself into the kerosene and lighting it. Yadav's gang pulled another woman from her house when she was 7 months pregnant. They stripped her naked and raped her on the road in the public view. Yadav ordered his men to drag girls as young as 12 to the nearby building to gang raped. Although admitting to being a rape victim in India was too taboo, but many of Yadav's victims reported his crimes. Instead of arresting Yadav, the police told all these victims' parents who had reported the crime that Yadav would go after them, and the police walked with Yadav, protecting them and supporting him. When a 22 years old woman reported being raped by Yadav, the police accused her of having an affair with him and sent her away to the police custody. Several women were turned away by police after being told you are loose woman. That's why he raped you. One woman even told the police she was gang raped by Yadav and his associates. The police responded by gang raping the woman themselves. 25 families moved out of Kasturba Nagar for this incident. People, however, removed their daughters from school and kept them locked inside their homes where nobody could see them. Even vegetable vendors avoid Kasturba Nagar, so housewives had to go to faraway markets to buy foods. As long as Yadav's only targeting poor people, police would not interfere anymore. After Yadav raped a 13 years old girl, he and his men went to the house of a woman named Ratna Dangiri to demand money. The gang smashed her furniture and threatened to the murder of her entire family. When a woman named Usha Narayani arrived afterward, she told Dangiri to go to the police. Dangiri refused, so Narayani went to the police by herself and filed a complaint against Yadav and his member. But police told Yadav about this entire complaint and engaged by her action. 2 weeks before he died, Yadav and 40 of his associates went to the Narayani house and surrounded it. Yadav carried a bottle of acid and shouted through the door that he would not harm Narayani if she withdrew the complaint against him. But Narayani barricaded the door and refused to surrender. She called the police, and although she was told they would come, they never arrived. In the meanwhile, Yadav continued to pound it on the door and threaten her, saying, "I will throw acid on your face and you won't be in a position to file any case anymore." If we ever meet you, you don't know what we'll do to you. Gang rape is nothing. You can't imagine what will we do to you, Narayani shouted back. Insults, and Yadav responds with a proper description of how he would rape, burn her with acids and murder her. Yadav and his men tried to break the door down. In response, Narayani turned on the cylinder of a gas that the family used for cooking and grabbing a match. She warned that if they broke into the house, she would light the match and blew herself and all of them. The criminals smelled the gas and left Narayani alone. The neighbors heard about what Narayani had done with her bravery. Soon there were many angry Dalits on the street, and they started to picking up sticks and stones. People threw stones at Yadav's associate. His men saw the crowd's mood are fired. The Dalits marched through the slum and celebrated. On 6th August 2004, they went to the Yadav's house and burned it down. Yadav's now feared for his life and went to the police for protection. They arrested him for his own protection on 7th August 2004. Yadav's mother vacated his house on 7th August on that very same day. Yadav was due to appear the city district court and 500 slums residents gathered over there. As Yadav arrived, one of his men tried to pass him knives wrapped in a blanket. The police failed to notice this. After a woman protested, the accomplice was arrested, and Yadav was taken back into custody. He threatened to return and teach every woman in the slum a lesson. On 8th August 2004, a group attacked Yadav while he was being taken before the court. He survived the attack only to be lynched 5 days before. After the police arrested Yadav for his own protection, a bail hearing was scheduled for him on 13 August 2004 in India's Nagpur District Court. Would spend through the adjoining neighborhood that he would be released. The police planned to keep him in custody until everyone had calmed down and then released him. The bail hearing was supposed to take place miles away in the center of Nagpur. Hundreds of women marched from the slum to the courthouse carrying vegetable knives and chili powder on their hand, walked into the courtroom and took seats near the front. Yadav walked in and was confident with his gesture. At about 2:30 to 3 p.m. when Yadav appeared, he saw a woman he had raped. Yadav mocked her, called her a prostitute and said her would rape her again and again. The police laughed, but the woman started hitting him on the head with her footwears. She told Yadav either she would kill him or he would have to kill her, saying, "We can't live both alive in this earth together. It's you or me." Yadav was then lynched by the mob of 200 to 400 women who showed up. He was stabbed at least 70 times and chili powder on stone were thrown in his face. The chili powder was also thrown into the face of police officers who guarded him. The police officer, overwhelmed and terrified, filed immediately. One of his elegant victims also hacked off his penis and chopped it off. The lynching occurred in a Nagpur District Court number 7 on the marble floor of the courtroom. As he was being lynched, Yadav was horrified and shouted, "Forgive me, I won't do it again." The women passed their knives around and kept stabbing him. Each woman agreed to stab Yadav at least once. His blood was on the floor and the walls of the courtroom. In 15 minutes, Yadav was dead. He was 32 years old of that time. The mob continuing attacking his corpse, post-mortem report told that. The woman claimed the murder was unplanned. One woman said, "We don't have any formal meetings, but it spread by words of mouth that we had to take united action." The state CID had a different version of the lynching. According to the senior police source, the lynching was done by 4 men with a sharp weapon, and the woman of Kasturba Nagar claimed responsibilities for the lynching to protect those men. None of women agreed with the police version. The police said both men and women were there when the lynching mob appeared. The women returned to the Kasturba Nagar to tell their husbands and fathers they had killed Yadav. The slum celebrated and the families put on music and dance in the streets. They brought food and handed out fruit to their friends. 5 women were arrested later but released immediately following demonstration in the city. Every woman living in the local slum claiming responsibilities for the lynching. Usha Narayani was arrested and charged the murder as a main or the principal character over there. As were other women, a crowd of 400 women and more than 100 men and children gathered at the courthouse to support this woman. The crowd said they would not move until the women were granted bail. In 2012, Narayani was acquitted. The judge noted a lack of reliable witnesses to the lynching, including unreliable police statements, and cited Yadav's autopsy report, which showed alcohol in his system, as a proof that he was receiving special treatment from police. Retired High Court Judge Bhau Bahani publicly defended the woman who lynching Yadav, saying, "In the circumstances they underwent, they were left with no alternatives but to finish Yakku." The women repeatedly pleaded with the police to their security, but the police failed to protect them. Vahani also said if they took law into their hands, it was because the law and the law enforcement agency had not given them a successful or a proper solution. ACP Dalbir Bharati was there are 200 women who said, "We did it." The investigation officer found no weapon or a blood mark on the 5 women who were arrested. "We found no evidence against these women shortly after Yadav's death. So, Outlook on an Indian magazine repeated the local police spoke indirectly about gang war between Yadav's group and similar other kind of group, and it's been flashed into the news. According to Outlook, a nephew of a Yadav sought revenge for his lynching in 2014. It was reported that all of the remaining accused in the Akku Yadav murder case were released due to lack of evidence. On the night of 4th December 2013, a nephew of Yadav named Mukri Chotelal Yadav was stabbed to death at the age of 30 by 2 teenagers aged 15 and 17. Mukri made sexual advance one of the teenager's grandmother and had once threatened her with a knife. The grandmother, who was in her 50s, was teased by Mukri and he offered intimidate her. The grandmother told the Tens about this and the Tens warned Mukri many times. But he continued to victimize the grandmother. Mukri, exactly like Yadav, also had a history of a crime in 2015. My God, Aditya, this story was pretty intense, right, listeners? Well, listeners, if you like this story, you know the drill. Leave your like, your comments, share this podcast, and consider subscribing. Till then, in the next episode, where me and Aditya come up with the true crime case from this Cases in a Diary. Bye.